Today I'm going to show you a fairly easy way of tempering multiple chisels at the same time if you don't want to use your kitchen oven and you don't have a small toaster oven that you can use for heat treating. Hi, I'm Dennis Frechette and welcome back. A few days ago I needed to temper a number of chisels and I didn't feel like dragging out my toaster oven, and my wife was using the kitchen oven, so that was off limits. So I decided to try tempering a bunch of them in the forge, and it worked out pretty well. So I decided I'd share that with you today. So this is the setup that I'm using. The bent piece of sheet metal that you see on the inside of the hood is just there to cast a shadow on the fire. I've already tested for magnetic, I know the color that I'm looking for, but the color is very low. So this piece of sheet metal will intensify that color because I'm working in a pretty bright shop and I need to be able to judge that color very easily when I'm working with a number of chisel blanks. All of the chisels that I'm heat treating today were done years ago when I had estimated the critical temperature to be much, much higher than it actually is. So the grain structure was enlarged, and that's the reason the edges weren't holding up. So the only way to repair that is to do the entire heat treating process all over again. And the key here, as with most things, is to try to keep the fire at the temperature that you want the steel to be. So here it's a very low fire and I'm just giving it enough air to keep the fire going, and the edges are slowly getting up to critical. So I'm going to bring them up to the critical temperature, hold them there for a while, let them cool slowly in air. That will reset the grain size, and then I can repeat the process and quench them in oil to harden them. And once again, because I'm keeping the fire at the critical temperature, I can put as many chisels in the fire as I want, and I don't have to worry about any of them running away and getting way above critical. So that allows me to work with quite a few chisel blanks and to be able to keep track of all of them. Here I'm a little further along, and at this point I have all of the chisels hardened and I'm getting ready to draw the temper on all of them. I will be using the same process. I'll have a number of chisels in the fire at the same time. However, this time the cutting edges are going to be facing towards me, and I'm going to be heating the blunt end of the chisel. So because I'm heating the blunt end, I can apply quite a bit more heat to it than I could if I had the cutting edges facing forward. So this will speed up the process a little bit, but it'll still be slow enough for me to really keep track of the tempering colors as they reach the edge. You can see that I still have the bent piece of sheet metal leaning up on the inside of my forge, and the only reason it's still there is because I want to cover the fire so my camera doesn't try to adjust for the brightness of the fire. So hopefully this will allow me to focus more on the cutting edge of the chisel and be able to show you the temper colors as they progress towards the edge. The flat piece of sheet metal that I'm working on is just there to make sure that there's no flames from the fire reaching the actual cutting edge. So I want the heat to transfer from the blunt end of the chisel through the chisel to the cutting edge. I did create a problem for myself here because I only ground the scale off of one side of the chisel. So you'll see me struggling with trying to keep one chisel facing up without changing the orientation of the other chisels around it. So the next time I do this, I'm definitely going to be grinding both sides of the chisel so it doesn't matter how they're facing. So now that I have a good fire going and I have some heat building into the chisels, it's time to just let the fire die back slightly and just wait for the temper colors to show up at the cutting edge. If you look at the second chisel from the top that has a longer ground surface, you can see how the temper colors are starting to reach the tip. So even though I can't see it in the other chisels yet, I know that I have to start monitoring this process so I can get a sense for how long it's going to take to get the temper color that I'm looking for to reach the edge. And as each chisel reaches the temper color that I'm looking for, I'll remove it, quench the tip to stop the tempering process, and then I'll replace it with another chisel or two. And I'll just keep repeating the process. As I pull one chisel out that's reached the proper temper color, I'll replace it with another. You do need to be careful when you're cooling these chisels to stop the tempering process that you only quench the very tip of the tool, because the blunt end of the chisel is directly in the fire. It could be at a red heat. So if you quench the entire tool, you would have a good cutting edge, but a very brittle end to the chisel that would shatter if you hammered it. So you start by quenching the tip to stop the tempering process, and then you let it set on the edge of the forge for a few seconds, and then quench the tip again, and do that a couple of times until you're sure that the blunt end of the chisel is well below the critical temperature. At that point, you can start quenching a little bit further up, but you can't quench the entire tool when you first take it out of the fire. One of the things that I like about this process is you're only heating the very end of the chisel to draw the temper. So the temper colors really move very slowly towards the tip. When you're using a torch to draw the temper, on the other hand, you tend to start part way up the chisel and you kind of follow the temper colors up towards the tip. So they tend to move a lot faster than they do if you're just heating the very end of the chisel. Now, you may argue that this process will take longer per chisel to draw the temper, but you offset that by having several chisels going through the process at the same time. Also, the fire is doing all the work, so you don't need to stand over these things and stare at each one the entire time. One of the things that really surprised me about this process is how quickly I got used to the rate of speed that things were happening. If I put similar sized chisels in the fire, then everything more or less happened at the same time. So you get pretty good at gauging how much time you can walk away from the fire, and with how little air you actually need to add to the fire to keep the process going. So I will definitely be using this process again on the next batch of chisels that I need to make.